All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. It is the fourth day of February, Monday. We're ready to get rolling here. I got a good program lined up for you in the second hour. First of all, I want to thank Gary. I was able to listen to the last part of the program there, and very informative. I really do appreciate Gary coming on here and giving us the Alternative Energy Hour every Monday from 5 o'clock West, 8 o'clock East, till 6 and 9, respectively. I appreciate him coming on here and doing that and giving us something a little bit different than what we normally talk about. All right, so coming up hour number 2 here in just a minute, Brian Tuohy is going to be back on with me. You might remember him from a few months ago. We had him on to talk about his book, The Fix Is In, and then a whole big long title underneath that. I just remember the Fix Is In part. It was all about collegiate professional sports and how the fix is in. And kind of apropos, I guess, Brian, because you know, we had the Super Bowl last night and the big drama with the power outage, and I immediately when I thought of that, I thought of the momentum change in the game. For those of you who watched it or you know read about it or saw the highlights after, it was definitely a momentum stopper for the Ravens, and you know the 49ers almost came back and won it from that point. But I did think of you in your book. And we'll get into that a little bit, but we're also going to talk about your new book, excuse me, disastergovernment.com. Before I bring Brian on, we talk about this. So, disastergovernment.com, I love the title of it. I haven't.
Well, I'd say it's just disaster government. Sorry, not .com.
That's sorry. That's the website. Sorry. All right. Well, I jumped ahead of myself there. Disastergovernment.com is the website. Disaster Government is the book.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's really coincidental, I guess, but not. The title of your book, Disaster Government, is exactly what I see every day when I, you know, open a newspaper, turn on the computer, and I look at this freak show that we have going on in government. But before we get rolling, I do want to talk a little bit about a commentary video that I put out tonight on the topic of, you know, of all things, disaster government. At least from my perspective, it's a disaster. Back in 2008, there was a lot of people, myself included, that were kind of taken back by then presidential candidate Barack Obama, talking about a civilian national security force. How we need a civilian national security force just as big, just as strong, just as well funded as our military. Now, this statement I thought was odd at the time, and a lot of folks in alternative media thought it was odd at the time. It barely got any play in the mainstream, if any, and it's pretty much been expunged from the record since then. It's hard to find video clips or certainly print article that have that speech highlights in it. But in fact, he did say it. I mean, and you can see it on this video that I'm posting later. Civilian national security force, just as big, just as strong, just as well funded. I thought at the time, well, this is, you know, we're going to see an expansion of something like the TSA, Department of Homeland Security. You know, this is not a military agency, and they certainly the security industrial complex was well on its way to blossoming into what it is in 2008. There was certainly no ambiguity in the statement itself. Civil National Security Force, that isn't talking about the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or some other kind of club. There's no other way to describe it other than take it at its face. Civil National Security Force, just as big, just as strong, just as well funded. And I was thinking today that if you take that statement in and of itself in 2008 and you plug in everything that we've seen happen since then, everything with disaster government, as Brian's going to come on to talk about, well, it kind of makes perfect sense. You know, when this statement was made, our national debt was about half of what it is now. When this statement was made, there was millions and millions of people that own homes that haven't had them foreclosed on since now. There's millions of people that are no longer working. Not only are they no longer working, there's millions that don't even rate to be added into the participation rate of the unemployment numbers. So when you look at that statement and you look at the reality on the ground, another one would be the too big to fail phenomenon. Back then, you know, we had a handful of too big to fails that we were going to get under control with things such as the Dodd-Frank Act, of 2010. Not only did it not get too big to fail under control, not only did it eliminate too big to fail, institutions like J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo are all way larger than they were in 2007 and 2008. So we don't have too big to fail. We have complete domination of the economy. So when you look at the path, when you look at the statement of 2008 and then the path we've been put on. Now, for those of you listening to me for a long time, you realize that I don't blame this all on Democrats or all on Republicans. I don't believe there's a difference between them. I think that it's one monster working for the same special interest. But when you look at the path that we've been on since Bush, now to Obama, this civil national security force makes perfect sense. The statement no longer is a vague statement of the past. It makes perfect sense today. We have a situation that is not being reported by the mainstream. We have a decline in the economy. We have a decline in hope, in real hope for the people looking towards the future. We have a decline in freedom. We have a decline in our financial certainty. And at the end of the day, we have now what's coming out as what I feel is an attack on the Second Amendment, at least in order to drive yet another wedge in this country. I don't think for 1 second they're going to come in and take the guns. I don't even think we're going to see an assault weapons ban. I don't even think we're going to see a 30-round magazine ban. I think this is just yet another dividing issue in order to distract us from what's happening. But what isn't a distraction, what isn't just a thought, is the buildup of the armament of non-military agencies. Civilian national security force, billions upon billions of rounds of ammunition going to agencies such as NOAA, going to agencies such as the Social Security Administration, going to agencies that have no business, at least as far as me being a United States citizen, would think that national security and all this armament belongs in the hands of the Social Security Administration or NOAA. They're not fighting war on terror. They're not fighting wars overseas. Why? Why do we have this buildup? Do they know something's coming? And this is the question posed in tonight's commentary video that I'll plug in after the program tonight. If we look at statements of the past and then look at them in under today's circumstances, they become a lot more clear. And I do believe civilian national security force is one of those things that was said briefly several years ago that is now coming into light. All right, let's bring on our guest before I burn up this whole entire first segment. Brian Tuohy, author of The Fix Is In, great book. What do you think? We have about a minute left before the first break, so let me just ask you what you think. Let's get the whole Super Bowl thing out of the way. How dramatic, man! We a blowout in the first half. Beyonce comes on, rocks it, whatever, draws a bunch of power. They come back on the field, bam, the lights go out. Complete momentum change. Did it pop into your brain for a second? Aha, a little momentum shift here.
I didn't really think about the momentum shift. I just thought about what caused the blackout and why it existed. I mean, you would think they would have had everything under control, and then you wonder, well, who was behind it or why it even occurred? And they haven't been able to supposedly figure out why this happened. But I've heard all sorts of rumors. It could be the NFL did it itself to get, some drama into the game, to get people talking about it, because at the time it was a significant blowout. It was, I think 28-6 at the time.
Yeah.
And then I heard, rumors that the city of New Orleans, which was angry at Roger Goodell and the NFL for the whole Bountygate scandal, which really crippled the New Orleans Saints this year, that they did it purposefully to get back at the NFL. I mean, I even thought actually at the time that maybe Anonymous was behind the whole thing.
You know what? That's weird, because I thought of your book and Anonymous, both of them. I thought, okay, this is there's some kind of statement going on. It was bizarre. I mean, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and it did. And it did change the momentum, apparently. I mean, made the game suddenly very, very interesting, and it kept it interesting to the very last play of the game, which is, of course, what the NFL wants, and what I think that a lot of times they force into being.
I do, too. And I was thinking at the beginning of the playoffs, and, I'm not a giant football fan. I mean, I watch it, certainly the Super Bowl. My kid is a Denver Broncos fan. He always has been, so we follow that team. And I'll pick up that point, but then we'll get into your book, Disaster Government, which you can check out at disastergovernment.com. I got it right. Okay, we're going to be back with Brian Tuohy, more Wide Awake News Radio. Hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, joined by Brian Tuohy. We're going to start talking about his book, Disaster Government, which you can look at information on the book or purchase the book at disastergovernment.com. But before we do, real quick, I want to ask you one more thing on the Super Bowl. And I know folks in chat are probably freaking out because we typically look at the gladiator games with a little disdain because it is used as such a distraction. And in a lot of ways, I view all these pro sports as being just a little bit more authentic than like the WWE wrestling type of thing. But I did think to myself, what gave me a little bit of hope that that this was I don't want to use the word organic or legitimate, but it really seemed going into the playoffs that the moneymakers, like the money-making Super Bowl appearance, would have been either Manning with or Manning or maybe New England or for the AFC. Yeah. And so when it ended up being San Francisco from the NFC and the Ravens from the AFC, I thought, well, that's pretty small market. But yet not the San Francisco small market, but as far as generating fervor, it certainly didn't seem like it was the two big dogs on the block. But they did a masterful job of spinning the whole brother thing and the whole last year for Lewis and the Kaepernick phenom thing. So, I guess regardless of who would have been in there, they'd have pumped this thing to the moon.
Well, and look at the ratings. I mean, it was, the third highest rated show, I think, in U.S. history, right? Yeah, so it worked, I guess. And I'd say the thing that freaked me out a little bit is when I thought about it is, in the last presidential election, you had about 126 million people vote, and you probably had the same amount of Americans watching the football game yesterday, or at least pretty close.
No doubt about it.
It kind of tells you a little something about our country, doesn't it?
It tells me a lot about our country, and that's why like I said, I'm probably going to get some grief in the chat for talking about this. But I've always enjoyed sports. I've always played sports. I've always been athletic. It is when it's on a like an amateur level, college or high school, or even younger than that.
Yeah.
It is enjoyable. It's enjoyable to participate in, and like in my case, I have a 12-year-old boy. It's great to go watch and participate in it, but to see what it turns into, I'm just not. I'm not a giant fan of this sensationalism, this making these people larger than life, and
I'd say just look at the amount of corruption that's in these games. I mean, provable corruption. It's monstrous, and then they make billions of dollars each of these things. But yet nobody talks about how many billions of dollars are wagered illegally on these games and where that money goes to, how it goes to organized crime. And they just had the big story in the New York Times today, I don't know if you saw it, where it was announced that this European, and I haven't read the whole story, but I know enough about to talk about it, this whole European group found out that literally, I think it was 680 games in soccer worldwide had been fixed by this criminal organization. And this included, World Cup games, which are bigger than the Super Bowl. And these guys had that kind of power to corrupt that many games. And my question is, if you can look at sports all around the world, you can look at soccer, which is the world's most popular game, and see games fixed all around the world. You can see tennis matches fixed, cricket games fixed, rugby matches fixed. How has that not touched American shores? How has that not infiltrated our country when we know, unfortunately, how corrupt our country is and the history we have of corruption in this country? How has it not affected our professional sports? And I think the only way it hasn't happened is because nobody's investigated it, and what the leagues know and what the networks know, they won't, advertise.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we talked about this a little bit, and we have only a minute in this segment, so I promise we're going to dedicate the whole next half hour to disaster government. But we talked about it a little bit before. You talk about corruption in sport, the known corruption in sports. My favorite sport, bar none, is boxing. I love it. I absolutely love it. I did a little bit of it when I was in the service. In fact, I just had to have a sinus surgery. One reason was because I got in the ring with somebody I shouldn't have. But I love the sport. I love the one-on-one. I love the I love the physical nature of it. The no question. The one sport where there should be no question who's a winner, and there isn't if you knock a guy out. But if it's in most cases it doesn't end in a knockout. Talk about a corrupt sport. I mean. I watched, and it's been since the last time you're on, I watched a Pacquiao fight. I don't know, did you have a chance to see that?
Yeah, I did see that one. And
that wasn't fixed. I'm just bringing that up because you're a sport fan, and that that blew me away. I mean, that knockout was absolutely unbelievable. Yeah. But truly, that's about the only way you're going to guarantee to get a fair shake is to, ragdoll somebody like that.
Yeah. Well, and even that, though, you don't know if the guy on the other side is tanking it. I mean, it's the easiest sport to fix because you literally have to get to one guy.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Historically, it's been proven to be fixed, and it's historically been proven to be controlled by organized crime members. And it's just amazing what they can get away with.
No doubt about it. And as long as, you're right, as long as it's making money for networks, and this money it certainly influences politics, it's going to remain the way it is. Gladiator games. And as long as we know that, know that going in. All right, we're going to be back with Brian Tuohy, more Wide Awake News Radio. Disaster Government is his new book. We're going to talk about that for the next half hour. Hang tight. Welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I apologize for not being in the chat right now. I'm trying to get in there, but my Windows 8 won't let me. I might try to fire up another computer so I can join you guys in chat. If you're listening and not in chat, you can go to wideawakenews.com, click on the second second tab or the microphone. That will take you into chat. Brian Tuohy, author of The Fix Is In, also has just come out with a new book called Disaster Government, which is actually why we got him on here to talk to us tonight, but we kind of got waylaid there a little bit. I asked him during the break, I said, what points do you want to cover? And he had a real ingenious way to talk about what he covers in the book, and that's by asking us, or more exactly, me, some questions. So Brian Tuohy, author of Disaster Government, that you can look at and purchase at disastergovernment.com. I turn it over to you. Interview away.
Well, it's just, and everybody can play along at home. The first question is, how many national emergencies do you believe the United States is under right now?
Well, that's a great question.
First of all, then before you even answer, go back. Okay. What is a national emergency?
Well, I was going to say that was going to kind of be I'm just going to give you a number so you can sure. Throw it. I'm going to say maybe events that have been declared national emergencies that were not undeclared. Half a dozen.
Right now, you're going to say we're under six right now.
I'm going to say 6. I know it's low, but I can see him on Skype. I know I'm way off.
By my last count, and this was a couple months ago, it was 25.
Wow. Okay.
National. Now, here's your question. Follow-up question. Can you name 3?
Would something like the flu pandemic, would that fall under this national emergency?
That was one. That's a good guess, but it's no longer one. Because it was the swine flu from a couple years ago. That was a national emergency.
Well, I'm going to go with weather. I'm going to say the big storm. Nope. Okay. I'm going to surrender. I'm going to surrender and say I don't know.
Well, here's one that kind of blows my mind. We're still under a national emergency from 9/11.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Now, no, it doesn't make sense. I mean, really, wasn't that over what 9/11?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a dozen years ago. But I mean, if you have my conspiratorial point of view, everything that we've seen happen in this country and around the world in our name is a direct result to that national emergency that are still being pounded down our throat every day. So, that does make sense. It's one I should have guessed right off the bat.
But I mean, some of the other ones are just bizarre. We're under a national emergency because of the current conditions in Zimbabwe.
Wait a minute. Explain that one.
I wish I could. It's part of the problem. Here's the thing: nobody's ever defined what a national emergency is. There's no official government, definition by any means. So what you're left with, the closest thing that ever came up was during the Reagan administration, and they called it a national security emergency. And that's the only time that terminology was used. It's always been national emergency before, national emergency since. But they called it a national security emergency, and what they basically said was whatever threatens national security can kind of basically be declared an emergency. So situations like the conditions in Zimbabwe somehow could turn into an emergency situation that could affect our national security.
Okay, well, wait a minute. All right, because you're saying, national emergency.
Yes.
And it used to be national security emergency.
For a short period.
There's no distinction between the two now? I mean,
really, no.
Okay, so if we have So everything's got to be security, right? Even
Right.
without saying it. So if we have let's say a rolling storms across the Midwest, and it wipes out crops and it downs a bunch of the power grid and that kind of thing. And I mean, that's a national. Is it just fall under security then? National security emergency, but shortened to national emergency. And the reason I ask that, I know I'm being kind of persnickety on the definition, but my point of view is everything is being sold to us under security, under the guise of security. So it makes sense that anything could be spun into a national security emergency. So much so they just dropped the security. Now it's just a national emergency.
Well, here's the scary part: is like the Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Katrina, and like the situation you brought up.
Uh-huh.
None of that's a national emergency.
Are those, what do they categorize? National disasters?
Well, yeah, I mean they would fall under perhaps become a disaster area, but they were never considered national emergencies. I mean, all the stuff you could talk, like the bank's failure, the housing bubble popping, the unemployment rate. I mean, there's a lot of things you would think that actually affect everyone in the United States, and none of that is a national emergency. What is national emergencies is like amazingly, like one of the big ones, a national emergency was the Korean War. That was actually a national emergency that turned into the Korean War. Vietnam, for some reason, was not, but the Korean War was. And a lot of the stuff today, it's almost like it's set up, like I said, the conditions in Zimbabwe are a national emergency, in Belarus are a national emergency, in Haiti are a national emergency for us. And I think it's almost set up as a way, if we wanted to go invade and send our troops there, because Iraq is one, Iran is one, Afghanistan is one, it's a way to basically use the War Powers Act in a way for the president to send troops in there and make war without having to declare a war, because it threatens supposedly our national security.
Okay, that to me makes absolute perfect. It doesn't make sense, but it makes perfect cover.
Yes,
it makes perfect cover for the activities that are happening today. And who's going to think national emergency? Who's going to think Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan or that has they're not an emergency here. Yet if they fall under this guise, and that would be my next question to you, is at what point does constitutional republics' ability to be ruled under the Constitution become suspended? Is it at the second that they label it a national emergency?
In a very real sense, yeah. I mean, there's nothing really in the Constitution that covers a national emergency, so there's no way for them to react to it. But the scary thing is when you have a national emergency declared, then it opens up all these different pieces of legislation and executive orders and things of that nature that have been laying around that the president could enact to basically fight the national emergency. And that's where it gets really frightening, is once there's a national emergency, then the government can, and this goes back literally to the 1960s, they could come in and confiscate your car, your personal vehicle. They can come confiscate your electromagnetic device now, which is, a computer, iPod, television, what have you. They could take over the media. They can basically even get to the point where they can force you where to work, what to do, and what wage you will work for. All because of a national emergency.
Which, so we see things like 9/11 occur. There's this is a national emergency. Then what do we have? We have the Patriot Act, thousands of pages. It was already waiting in the wings, like you said, legislation that is written, ready to be implemented. And God knows only how many executive orders, signing statements, pieces of legislation that have been written under the guise of potential crisis or potential emergency that have been implemented or are waiting to be implemented for the next emergency.
Well, and on top of that, then you get into which the book gets into, is the continuity government stuff, which is where the government can basically go run and hide underground while we take care of ourselves type of thing. But the continuity government thing is scary because no one in the government really knows what's even in those plans, yet they exist.
How deep did you go into that in the continuity of government?
As far as you can, because so much of it is top secret, and some of it's logically. I mean, if you believe in the United States and what the government should be, then obviously if we got into a war if we got, nuked, if there really was a national emergency that really threatened our borders, well, obviously you'd want to save the government and have them go to some secure location where they can respond to the crisis at hand. So, I mean, that makes sense, assuming you take the, best possible government that we all kind of want.
Which is certainly...
But that's not what we have, so
That's exactly right.
Thing.
Brian Tuohy, hang tight. We're gonna talk about continuity of government on the backside of this break. There's I'm gonna pull something up while we're at break here about regional zones under the continuity of government that basically suspends states' rights, suspends anything as the United States in order to preserve the continuity of government. We're gonna be back with Brian Tuohy in just a minute. Hang tight. All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, Brian Tuohy, talking about his book, Disaster Government. But somebody in chat sent a message, and I'm in there now. I've finally been able to get in there. But Gary related to us a message for Brian, somebody asking about the team of purple. Yeah. And you want to explain that, Brian? That's kind of interesting.
Well, I had a fan of my website from thefixesin.net email me. It was before the regular season of the NFL ended. I don't remember exactly what week it was, but he said that he had heard from someone or from some source that a team of purple was going to win the Super Bowl, and that basically leaves the Minnesota Vikings or the Baltimore Ravens. They're the only two teams with purple in them, and both of them made the playoffs, and sure enough, the Baltimore Ravens won the Super Bowl. So whatever that source was, he was right on the money.
Fixes in, brother.
Yeah, exactly.
No doubt about it. All right, the disaster government, national emergency, continuity of government, and you. We started talking a little bit about continuity of government, and I had asked you, how deep did your research go on this? Because there's a lot of people, myself included, that believe this truly is a blueprint for martial law, a blueprint for a totalitarian police state. What did you find in your investigation for your book?
Well, that you're pretty much right.
Great.
To find a point on it. Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things I uncovered, which I got through the Freedom of Information Act, was an FBI file. And it discussed something I'd never heard about before. It was called basically the Emergency Detention Act. And what this is the government had a list, I think at the time, this was probably late 60s, early 70s, a list of about 10,000 individuals that, given a national emergency, which again is undefined, the FBI was ordered basically to go round up these 10,000 people, even if they weren't doing anything, and detain them, to arrest them, because they were considered dissenters and basically problematic, and they wanted them taken out of the loop. And, that was a legitimate thing. I mean, this is, like I say, straight out of the FBI files. It's not a conspiracy theory. It really was. And the FBI's problem wasn't that they were being ordered to do this. Their problem was, how are we going to do this? Because they figured, well, okay, say it's a nuclear war. How are we going to go out and then find these 10,000 people and, pick them up like you want us to? But as this has progressed, I think this list has grown bigger and bigger and bigger, because I think this is what turned into like the no-fly list. And I don't know if you've ever heard of like a supposed database called Main Core, where supposedly they have a list of perhaps as many as 8 million people on it that are considered potential now terrorists or threats to the government that, given, again, the right set of circumstances, these people are going to be rounded up and literally detained just because.
So this list of 10,000, and yeah, I have heard of that list. The no-fly list is sitting at over 1 million, and this other list, like you said, is over 8 million.
Yeah.
Nobody knows why they're on it. Or I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people don't understand why they're on it. Don't know how to get off it. Don't know who to go to for a redress of their grievances. They're just on the list, period. That's it. But this original list of 10,000 that the FBI could go swoop in, dissenters, what year was that originally put into pen to paper?
That's a good question. Roughly, I would say the late 1960s.
Okay.
So I think, it's around the hippie era and that whole generation.
So Gary producing the video feed tonight was definitely on that list, because he's a major hippie.
And you and I are probably on the new one, so
we are. We're on the new school list.
Yeah,
Gary's on both.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, I have absolutely no doubt. I like I said on the program the other night, when this whole Sandy Hook thing went down, there was a list of websites that were turned over as people that were coming out trying to profiteer from the victims' families of and the network that we broadcast on was mentioned on one of them, and it was absolutely, it was beyond ridiculous. Yet, this is how I truly believe in this in our information age. This is all it takes for you to get put onto some kind of a rabble-rouser, potential belligerent actor list. So I have no doubt that it's millions and millions strong. Especially when go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, going back then to what you can do under a national emergency, it allows the government to take control of the media and the airwaves to a certain extent. So if they did determine your program, for example, to be dangerous, they would then have the right to take you right off the air because it's a national emergency and we have to do this. So they could start censoring a lot of people in a lot of areas just because they feel it's problematic.
I find it funny that – wait a minute, let me take that back. I find it troubling that a lot of the things that you're talking about in continuity of government that fall under the guise of – would this just be under the guise of national emergencies?
Yeah,
or is the full continuity of government plan, rounding up the dissidents, that whole thing, is that only in, from your research, does it show that it was only meant to be in the event of a major, an invasion from another country or global war?
Well, because the national emergency thing is left really up to interpretation. I mean, I think originally when it was first kind of designed, which is back in like the Eisenhower and early Kennedy administration, it was on the notion of going toe-to-toe with the Russians, that it was going to become a real nuclear war, and in order for the United States to survive, we're going to have to implement some things that really aren't constitutional, which is kind of the irony of the whole thing. They wanted to do things that were nowhere near constitutional, basically to try to save the Constitution and the United States government. But I think it's warped. As it's gone on and it's stretched on, that this whole concept is really completely warped to a whole new stage. And like I say, that's part of the problem with the whole thing is what you believe the government to be. If you believe it to be like the Constitution, then you want it saved. And in a way, you would kind of want them to implement these things to save it. But the way we see the government today, many people see the government today, is you don't want it saved. And they're going to be the ones who cause this problem, that create a situation where supposedly to save the Constitution, they're going to do all these unconstitutional things and basically legally overthrow the country and make it an entire new country.
No doubt about it. And you're right. You can see how this self-sustaining, self-feeding monster has been created. And it was, you brought up Eisenhower when this all began. But, he was the architect of the invasion of Europe in World War II and president. When he left office, he warned the people of this nation. He warned that this military industrial complex was out of control and operated in the shadows of government and is dominating government. And here we are, all these years later. The things you're talking about with continuity of government, though, what I was going to say is the most troubling is the build-out of apparatus to implement the continuity of government is what I've seen in the last decade, right? Since 9/11, this build-out of security. I opened the program with the civilian national security force, just as big, just as strong, just as well funded. And guess what? I mean, this is the kind of thing you would need instead of a 10,000 person FBI list if you wanted to round up an 8 million person belligerent actor list, Brian.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's one of the things is they put a lot of this, or they try to put a lot of this, like on FEMA's doorstep. Well, FEMA has about 5,000-6,000 people working for them. They're not going to be able to, implement martial law in a city, much less the entire country. But then you have something as monstrous as the Department of Homeland Security, and suddenly, everything changes. Suddenly they have a lot more people working for them, and they can do a lot more damage. But the thing, going back to continuity government, too, is I mentioned in the book, a lot of the supposed secret hiding places, like, Raven Rock and the old Greenbrier Hotel, and the places where our government is supposed to go and hide. Well, these are all known entities. And if I could figure out where they are, and, an internet search will figure out where they are, obviously our enemies know where they are, there's got to be alternate sites to these alternate sites, which means that somewhere in the United States there are several big, massive underground bases that Congress and the president are going to go to when things really go bad. And it's not going to be Mount Weather, which we know about. It's going to be somewhere completely different. And where is that place? How much did it cost to build? And what's going on there?
Well, there's a lot of people that think it's 30 miles north of Denver. You know, you have Stapleton, which there was nothing wrong with that airport by all accounts. So they decide to close Stapleton, build an international airport 30 miles in the middle of nowhere, and it's massively over budget, massive amount of material shipped in, and more importantly, masses and pyramids of earth that are stacked up around there that really can't be explained as far as the excavation part of it goes. A lot of people think that, you know, and especially with all the symbolism that's inside there, the Masonic symbolism, the New World Order. Have you ever been through that, Brian? Have you ever been through that airport?
Yeah, actually, I was just in October, and there is some weird,
creepy,
there. Yeah,
creepy into the world art that that is apocalyptic in nature. And when you walk through there and see all the other bizarre symbols that a lot of people think represent and symbolize the New World Order, there's certainly there's a plethora of that. Matter of fact, they had a big old statue of Anubis out there for a while, and finally there was so much outrage they yanked that thing down. But so yeah, I agree. I mean, if they're spending $1.4 trillion, 1.4 trillion dollars a year in deficit alone on the books, you know, how much is this really costing to build these secure, safe locations for the power elite?
Well, and one of the things too I bring up, because I know it's a hot topic, is out of all the research I did, and if you look at the source list of my book, it's pretty extensive. What I looked at is there's one thing that's never brought up is like the confiscation of guns. Amazingly, I mean, considering all the things they talk about martial law and what they want to be able to do and implement, they never bring up guns. And it's something that just recently dawned on me, actually, after I released the book even. That I was like, wow, that's kind of strange that, they're talking about all these different gun laws they're trying to pass, whether they pass them or not, who knows. But in none of these continuity government plans or these national emergency plans do they ever talk anything or mention guns. And I find that really odd, given what, like I say, what they want to do. And I have no explanation for it. I mean, it's like I say, it's just kind of one of those things that I really legitimately just dawned on me the other day.
Well, I mean, I think if you were going to write and actually, I don't know if that's exactly true, that throughout history there hasn't been reference to an armed populace being a problem for a tyrannical overthrow of this country. But if you're talking, dang it, it makes sense in this respect. You can't, if you put in documents somewhere an action plan is disarm the people of this country. How would you describe a scenario that we have to do this? How can you make a contingency plan for disarming the people of this country? I mean, I think it would ring like a siren if they wrote that down somewhere. You know what I mean?
If you could find it. If you could find that document, that's the thing.
No, that's just it. I'm thinking they probably purposely circumvented that because it would send up too many red flags. We're going to have continuity government, we're going to have FEMA, we're going to have suspension of constitutional rights, and we're going to take guns. Well, there's only one reason you'd want to do all those things, and that is to subjugate a nation. Brian Tuohy, let me give your website real quick before we completely run out of time. Disastergovernment.com. Go over there, check it out, buy his book. I'm going to get a copy of his book, and I'm going to read it, and then we'll get you back on after I read it so I can pick your brain.
Sounds good. Great. I appreciate you having me on.
No problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Guys, please stay tuned for Jeff Rintz because he's coming up next. We'll see you tomorrow night. Have a good night. Peace.